And we are
We're
back.
back.
We are back. We're back.
We're back.
Yes. Interesting weather we're having.
Yes. Apparently the weather did not want to hear the story.
No, but that's okay. We wanted to hear the story.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Tales of Valentine's, Lover's Leap, etc., etc. Hey, would you look at that? We're live. Oh, I got it too.
Imagine that.
I know. And of course, we hope everybody can log back in and catch inadvertent part 2 of our Dark Ozarks Tales.
So where were we? We
Lovers Leap with those archetypal points of this story.
Yes.
Lots of different cool parts. I think there's a lot of some of the known origin points.
Right.
I'll say the known origin points of the story could be labeled quote unquote problematic.
Yeah.
Because of the basically European settlers or American settlers co-opting this Native American story.
That's true. That's true. Now, there is a twist. There is a twist. There is a theory that Native Americans actually did create the stories, invented them to tell the settlers so that they would leave them alone.
Yeah.
So
and that is fair as well. There's also the potential that elements of these stories were woven into elements of lore.
Yes.
I mean, we can't discount that possibility.
Exactly.
And it's simply because these stories have archetypal qualities.
Very much so. I mean, very much so.
And by archetypal qualities in this regard, I'm just saying these are very human stories.
They are themes and patterns that you see in all cultures.
And so we, in the previous video, we talked about the story of the princess.
Yes.
Who is what's the word for it? Is in love with essentially the enemy knight. Yeah. And her father, the king, disapproves, kills the knight, then she kills herself.
And curses her own people.
But she specifically kills herself. The knight is killed, or brave, is killed by being thrown off a cliff.
Right.
And then she throws herself off the cliff.
Yeah.
And of course, there's that collective dynamic. It is certainly elements of Shakespeare.
Yes, definitely.
And it's one of those things. I think that in our workaday world, when everything is just sort of perhaps a bit mundane, there is an appeal of tragic romance, of love so powerful that you would die for it.
Exactly. And in this instance, so powerful that it could actually create a curse that works. Yes.
Yes. And I think especially, we'll reference Scottish folklore. I mean, it is not unreasonable to look at a variety of lores that has that kind of intensity, that intense sorrow, intense hatred can essentially act as a conjuring agent.
Yes. And that is kind of universal too, that idea of basically a thought form that you can create emotions intense enough that they take on a life of their own and can interact with the world and exact revenge. I mean, in various forms, everything from just pure thought. A lot of people want to use the poltergeist as a means for that now in telling current hauntings. You can even go back to Jewish lore, and the golem is analogous to that. I mean, just all across the board.
And I think it's interesting. A lot of poltergeist activity is associated with teenage girls.
Yes, it can be teenage boys too, but it's generally teenagers.
And
lots of hormones.
Yes, and now we have these stories that are sort of a heightened archetypal and sometimes supernatural stories. We'll get into one. I want to save the creepcore one for just a little bit later.
Okay.
But a lot of intensity and typically dealing with teenagers.
Yes, which I think kind of just goes to show that people have been dealing with teenage angst forever.
I think so. So, if you're at your wit's end in regards to your teenager, just look on the bright side. This hasn't happened.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You haven't conjured a poltergeist yet.
And I haven't hopefully leapt off a cliff.
A cliff. So, those elements. Now, what I thought was interesting, we have from Central Missouri, South Central Missouri, Ozarks.
Yeah.
The Hahatonka State Park region, and then around Osage River in more in the Camden area, which really is not that far apart.
No, not really.
We have basically the same story that's associated with two different bluffs.
Right.
And now this story, this Lover's Leap, is a situation where the beautiful princess is desired by an enemy.
Right.
Knight or brave, young man who wants the girl and is going to go to any lengths to get her, including kidnapping her.
Helen of Troy.
Yes, very, very, very much so. And as you can imagine, that does not typically turn out well.
It usually has some repercussions one way or the other.
Yes, and I found this interesting. Of course, the Tom Sock story is a situation in which the girl is willing to die because her lover has been killed.
Yes.
In this case,
she's not quite so
she is willing to die to get away from him.
Yes. Which I guess no means no.
Right. In any language and in any situation. Yes, if the girl that you're after is willing to throw herself off a cliff not to be with you, it's time for you to rethink your strategy.
Yes.
And no matter how beautiful she is, it is a cautionary tale.
Very much so.
And you should have just had a nice conversation and gone on your way.
And, granted, maybe she should have come up with a different...
a different exit plan, a different strategy.
Yes.
Well, they are teenagers. They didn't think it all the way through.
Exactly.
And the cliff was right there.
That's true. It was handy. And I think that's, no joking aside, I think that is part of it, is that, it's the cautionary tale that teenagers don't think things through.
Yes, they do not. And if you're familiar with the Ozarks, cliffs are rather readily available.
Yeah, you don't usually have to go too far.
No, and I grew up as a flatlander in central Illinois. We have bluffs and stuff, but not these abrupt and sheer rock faces. And in the Ozarks, because the hills are not so much you don't go up into the mountains as much as you just kind of degrade down into the hollers.
Right.
And many times I've had this experience where you go along and you might be in a cedar glade, you might be, and you kind of go around a corner.
Watch where you step.
And then there's the end of the world. And you're looking down 50 or 60 feet onto rock. This is a very real aspect of the Ozarks.
It really is. And so in that part, those stories can sound very credible because you're looking at it and saying, oh,
it's right there.
It's right there. That could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And some of these bluffs are so notable that they are named, and they are even landmarks,
right?
Especially from like the river, that kind of thing. So in this particular situation, now this was odd. I found this part of this story comes through Bridal Cave.
Yeah.
In Camdenton, and the brave kidnaps the young woman, the princess, against her will.
Yeah.
And then of course her
hides her out.
Yes, and they're being pursued by her family and friends who are saying we want her back, and then they say let's hide in the cave, which of course was not known as Bridal Cave at the time.
Right.
Not the most romantic beginnings potentially, but then the idea, the romanticized story. At daybreak, she gets loose, runs away. He pursues her,
right,
and then presumably the only way out is either to go back to him or jump off it.
And so off
she goes. And
That's called a bad date.
that 101 ways your day can go horribly wrong. And that's 102 of them, all at once. And the story of what happens to him gets a little fuzzy at that point.
Yeah, I mean,
he goes away. Is he captured? We don't really know.
Don't know if they kill him or he escapes.
Lots of different options, but then
It doesn't really matter, I guess, after.
Right. But what is interesting? This seems to be in the case of both tales, that then there is a part 2 of the story in which the princess's closest friend falls in love with this dude's brother.
Yeah.
And then they get married, and in one case are actually married in the cave, in Bridal Cave. It was the very first wedding in the cave.
Yeah.
We don't know that happened.
It just seems like a very awkward family dinner. So.
Hey, has anybody seen? Oh, I'm sorry. Now this story is also associated with the bluff at Hahatonka.
Yes.
And that Hahatonka State Park is no laughing matter. That's my worst joke for the evening. But I love the state park.
Yeah, I do too.
There's I think in 1904 there's actually a turn of the century mansion built by Kansas City millionaire Robert Snyder.
Right.
And he passed away in 1906 before he was actually
I don't think he actually lived there yet.
Lived there. His son finished. His son finished the construction.
Right.
But then in the 1940s, the mansion burned
down. Yeah.
And the remnants are there. It is a Missouri state park. Very evocative location.
It is.
I'd like to know if it's haunted.
There are stories that it is.
It certainly. I mean, it looks like it.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has the look to it. I don't know. I haven't ever experienced anything, but I've heard people say that they've had experiences there.
And now the Hahatonka Spring is a big feature. 58 million gallons of spring water coming out of the.
It's one of the biggest in those Ozarks.
Which is saying a lot.
Yeah, because there are a lot of big ones.
It is, and this is all just south of Camdenton. Super easy to get to if you're in southern Missouri. I've been there a couple of times.
I have too.
And the natural bridge, multiple caves, but the bluff upon which the mansion was built,
right?
That was rumored to be the Lover's Leap that the girl
jumps off
of, which would be quite a trip down.
I wouldn't want to do it.
I wouldn't either. I'm scared of heights. I would find much more imaginative ways of doing something like this. I actually wouldn't.
No, I think just leaving the bad date would be enough. But.
It's not really funny, but it's kind of funny. We're not laughing at them; we're laughing with them.
Okay.
Valentine's Day. So I know. Beats a Hallmark card. Or yeah, I know. What have I been smoking? It's not Lisa. It's just I'm very tired. It really is. And I had a lot of coffee today.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, I really have. In this regard, Lover's Leap, the story is also in Hannibal.
Yes.
Which is a northern Ozarks borderland.
Yeah, in the borderland up there. And it's tied up with the Mark Twain Cave.
Yes, it is.
And ironically, the Mark Twain Cave actually goes back to Professor McDowell.
Yes, it does. Our most unromantic of romantic mad scientists in the Ozarks.
Yes. So the cave, has stories of him basically putting his daughter in formaldehyde to try to preserve her until he could bring her back to life. And then basically a Lover's Sleep story too. So
yes, lots of, and I love the we'll talk more about Borderlands shortly, but I love the sort of the conflation of potential origin story plus lore plus stir heartily with tourism.
Yes. Well, and that cave has been a tourist cave since back in the 1800s.
Yeah. And that also is a dynamic, and we have this tourism aspect. People oftentimes associate tourism with modernism,
Right.
but that's not necessarily the case.
No. Tourism pretty much showed up not too long after the settlers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's a dynamic that doesn't quite jive with our modern sensibility. I think it's very easy for people to associate tourism with the automobile age.
Well, I think they do, but it started way before then,
Mm-hmm.
and they had tours of that cave, and it was McDowell's cave. Then they parlayed Mark Twain's fame
Mm-hmm.
by changing the name of the cave,
Which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, many of the renowned caves here in the Ozarks, first of all, have hauntings
Mm-hmm.
associated with them, and were show caves well back into the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Marvel Cave, which is part of Silver Dollar City now, or Silver Dollar City is on top of Marvel Cave, it became a show cave shortly after they mined out all the bat poop.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That was an important feature.
Guano.
Yeah, fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
Fertilizer and gunpowder.
Yeah.
Which were
Prize.
very prized for mining.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we do have the Burning Bride.
Yes, and besides Bonnie and Clyde, perhaps the most tragic
Mm-hmm.
love story.
Yes, and I think it's hard to tell in the case of the Fayetteville Burning Bride or the Arkansas Burning Bride, where origin point ends and where lore
Right.
begins. It is interesting. The general consensus. It is set not long after the Fayetteville region began to be settled.
Right.
And
Father, I think, was one of the founders, supposedly.
that's the implication, and with close ties to Little Rock, and with quite a bit of money, it is an interesting cultural juxtaposition, because you're dealing with wilderness and early settlement, but you're also dealing with money.
Yes, and that affluence is a key part in the story.
It is, and I think it bears just a little bit of contemplation. Again, our modern sensibilities associate Western settlement or frontier settlement with basically poor farmers.
Overall, yes.
Poor farmers, poor miners, the first folks to go out and
scraping by.
Mm-hmm. And that in this particular case, I like the fact that the lore suggests something very different. And I think that in certain areas, and I believe Fayetteville is a good example of that. That some of the first founders were reasonably to quite affluent.
They were. They particularly those that ended up with a lot of land, and in this particular case, it came through with the wedding dress.
Mm-hmm. And that there's elements that when you understand that sort of surreal clash of, yes, we have money, but we're also on the frontier.
Living in a log cabin
starts to make sense. The location for the legend is in Fayetteville. It's really just on the southeast edge of downtown, and it's a holler. The Confederate Cemetery is there today, and I was actually there not long ago. And it's a beautiful location. You can see the downtown from the hill, but it's also a little. There's an interesting energy there.
That's fair. I mean, often with war cemeteries, you do.
And the story is that this girl had grown up in the cabin, in the log cabin, wearing calico or simple dresses, and then her father, who was comparatively quite affluent, she gets married, and her wedding gown is of Venetian lace.
Yes. Very expensive, very ornate.
Very flammable.
Yeah.
And they have the wedding. They go home. She's still wearing her gown. And she goes to tend the fire in the big open fireplace. And as the story goes, she was used to her calico,
Right.
and that if a bit of her dress were to catch on fire, she'd just pat it out
Right.
with the cotton. So not thinking allows the dress to get too close to the fire. It catches on fire, but instead of being able to be patted out, it instantly explodes into flame.
Yes.
And
she's just engulfed.
yes. And in horror and in fear, she runs out of the cabin into the forest.
Right.
And ultimately ends up setting the forest on fire.
Yes.
As well.
And I think that's very symbolic too. It's kind of like over at Tom Salk with the waterfall being formed. Not only a personal tragedy, but you lose the entire forest.
Yes, I think that's a good point. And interesting point, counterpoint of fire and water.
Oh, that's true.
It's very evocative. The other thing, and this is certainly common in Anglo-Saxon lore that became, and I would say to a certain degree, Welsh or Celtic lore, ultimately becoming Tudor era legends and that sort of thing. But this idea, the point of wedding, is traditionally considered to be an extremely dangerous time.
Yes, it's a very 20th century notion that the wedding is all fairy tale and good luck and everything. Traditionally, it symbolized a lot of change and danger of death, illness, etc.
And the idea that being too arrogant, too happy, too unthinking of the unseen realms would invite peril.
Right. So basically, everything that we have this notion of weddings now, these big affairs that people spend lots of money on, they're supposed to be this fairy tale and everything, or actually that entire sentiment and environment is what would cause the bad luck traditionally.
Yes. This is actually a very sobering time that you really essentially need to walk on eggshells.
Yes.
And that you need to get through this and then kind of let things calm down and then let that become your normal.
Right.
Before you can sort of take a breath and say, okay, we made it.
Right.
And of course, wedding was one of those. Childbirth
was
a
as
huge
well.
one for obvious reasons, with incredibly high infant mortality.
Yes, and for the mothers as well.
Very much so. And something that I'm not sure your thoughts on this, but it crossed my mind. One of our favorite heroes, John Dee.
Yes.
Not only weddings, but coronations would fall into the same category.
That's true.
And Queen Elizabeth I asked John Dee very seriously,
yes,
as the court astrologer, to pick her
coronation date.
And not just for auspiciousness, but essentially for
safety,
like this larger astrological and fate safety.
Well, and of course it made sense for her too, because we're not too far removed from legitimacy issues for the Tudors. Literally, her grandfather.
Yeah.
So, and let's face it, the other Roses were waiting for any chance. And of course, and also there had been so much drama and everything with her father's reign that she wanted things to go smoothly, no questions asked, and get on with the business of business.
100%. And who can blame her?
No, smart. And in those times, that's what you did. You consulted the astrologer for that information.
And for the record, I couldn't think of anyone better to consult.
No,
than
I
John
agree.
Dee.
I agree, and I guess you could say that he picked a good date because she certainly had an impressive reign.
Yes, she did.
Perhaps the most impressive of British monarchs.
I think that's reasonable.
I think so.
I think Queen Elizabeth I is probably our favorite British monarch.
Oh yeah, easily.
Not necessarily the people of Ireland's favorite British monarch. I'm not sure if they have a favorite British monarch.
Or the Scottish either. Really.
Yeah, that's very true. Our Celtic blood is rising against our opinions. But the Tudors were Welsh.
That's true. That is true. They had that going for them.
They did. Now, something that I think is interesting, of course, I love geography. Mm-hmm. We have the Ozarks proper.
Yes.
Which is the raised upland plateau. Mm-hmm. That is essentially Jeff City, Missouri, down to Little Rock, mm-hmm. Arkansas, on the north-south, and then east-west, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, mm-hmm. pretty much, over to Cape Girardeau in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So, and then an interesting shape within that. We've got river boundaries. Probably the fuzziest mm-hmm. Boundary is actually in your neck of the woods.
A little bit.
That sort of from Tahlequah up to Sedalia.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is we don't have a clear river boundary.
Yeah, there is not one north-south. Yeah.
It's primarily rivers, a lot of river origin points.
Yeah.
That are either become part of the White River Basin mm-hmm. or become part of the Missouri.
Right, one or the other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that is geologically the Ozarks proper. Mm-hmm. Now we have some simple realities. Yeah. In that, and then we also have Ozarks Borderlands. Yeah. Those spaces, because it's simply the reality that, for example, Ozarks culture doesn't just stop at a geographical line.
No, the culture doesn't stop at a street sign.
No. And so you see overlap there. You also see in terms of certainly some of the inverse with because a good portion of the St. Louis Metroplex is within the Ozarks geologically,
right?
But it's really not necessarily culturally part of the Ozarks. It's part of the St. Louis city, or St. Louis Metro,
right?
That of course has its own sort of culture and structure.
Very much so.
So there's give and take on both sides. As we get into the southern region, mm-hmm. Something that is interesting, and I'm excited about further exploration, is the Ouachita Mountain Range.
Yes.
Ouachitas are a beautiful east-west running mountain range, mm-hmm. not an upland plateau.
Right.
And it's not part of the Ozarks. It's south of the Arkansas River. Mm-hmm. And it stretches from Arkansas into Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. However, culturally,
it's the same. Same people.
Same peoples. Such a shared history.
Yeah.
And a shared culture.
And a lot of events affected each other.
Yes,
in
they
those
did.
Locations.
And the landscape itself is beautiful, dramatic, evocative, and it's a really exciting region to highlight, to focus on, explore. Mm-hmm. And then from that point, you also have the borderlands of the Ouachitas.
Yes.
The Great Piney Forest of the south,
mm-hmm.
Which once you get out of Little Rock on the south side, you're immediately into, which I love. And those are areas that, for example, you have Texarkana.
Yes.
Which is the one and only place I've eaten at a Whataburger. It was a delightful experience in December of 2009. And with Texarkana, there's also the Boggy Creek region.
Yes.
And the Falcon Monster.
Yes.
Or the Boggy Creek Monster, which again is part of that cultural tie.
Yes.
And then on the southeast,
mm-hmm.
just in terms of piney woods, you can stretch into regions like Pine Bluff.
Yes.
And again, it's obviously not part of the Ozarks proper, mm-hmm. but in terms of what you could even call the Ozarks diaspora, that this is part of that process. Crowley Ridge mm-hmm. is in the southeastern Missouri Ozarks region, mm-hmm. Is a separate ridge,
right?
But it's
definitely part of
part of that culture.
Yeah.
And recognizably so by the people there. You got we got phenomenal response.
We did.
Thank you guys.
Yes. Great response on the Crowley Ridge article, and actually, I think the largest response we've had.
Largest response, yeah. It was so cool. I'm actually looking forward to getting to see those. See that
cool.
soon.
Cool.
State of the Ozarks will be checking some stuff out this spring. So in that regard, now that I've sort of set the stage, we have the Ouachitas and we have the piney regions south of the Ouachitas. You have some really interesting stories. Monticello.
Monticello. Yeah, if you want a sort of a tragic Valentine story, the Allen house and the Allen family in Monticello is probably the most haunted house in Arkansas, reputedly so anyway. Well-to-do family. In the 40s, the daughter Liddell, she was a little older, I think she was in her 30s, became entwined with this fellow from up north, Minnesota or someplace, and they had a torrid love affair, and he was married, but he was supposed to leave the wife, and when she found out that he wasn't, she killed herself in the family home, and the stories are that Liddell still haunts the house.
And that now, have you had the chance to be there?
I have not. Okay. It is on my list. We've got to get there before too long.
Now, just talking about hauntings for a moment, something that we've talked a lot about is just sort of the normalization of the paranormal, and in fact, as you said many times, that you could very easily be eating breakfast with someone and not know it.
Yeah, that's true.
That there's and that in many cases hauntings can come for a variety of reasons, very mundane reasons, or very warm reasons. Yeah,
yes.
That maybe you just loved the location and you're not ready to give it up.
And I'd say the majority of hauntings fall in those categories. Just basically someone going through their daily routine, or someone is somewhere that they felt very comfortable.
And the place that we refer to many times, I certainly refer to many times as well, Kinderhouse.
Yes.
Very, very warm, inviting environment for most people.
Yes.
As long as they like you.
Yes.
and just to again, you get that sense of good times, of warm times,
yes.
Certainly a sense of watchfulness, but not a negative.
No.
In that regard. Now, what do you make? The Monticello story involves someone who dies prematurely young,
yes.
by their own hand, and in a moment of extreme emotional distress.
Yes. Basically, it's kind of like, as we talked about, putting herself on the line, her status, and all for naught.
Yes.
And not being able to deal with it. Although she is older than a lot of these stories. She's not the teenage angst. She's in her 30s, but just felt that was the end. And maybe that's even more tragic, because you can forgive teenage thoughtlessness and rashness, but at that age, perhaps not. But I think it came down more to what she had risked for her family's reputation and everything was more than she could bear.
And that's rough.
Yeah,
it's incredibly rough. It's very sad. In one hand, you could say it's a cautionary tale, but for me, my heart just goes out to her.
Yes, definitely. It would be nice if she, had peace, but apparently she is still there, and the stories go that she is still very sad.
Have you, are there any, in terms of your investigations,
Mhm.
are there any particular moments that stood out to you that you feel like you encountered that kind of situation?
Actually, the closest I would say actually would be at the Kendrick House with some of the family members there that have that went through a lot and lost a lot, particularly during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Not for the same reasons, but not for the toward affair, but just sadness that everything went away.
And that can be
Yeah.
very difficult.
I mean, I really haven't. I haven't had the occasion of investigating a haunting quite like the Allen House. I guess maybe the closest would be the Bonnie and Clyde hideout.
And I think that's fair. Now we have a list of really terrible things happening. That's what we have. And it's at the end there. Yes. Really terrible things happening. Are there any particular murders that you'd like to discuss as just as we kind of close out?
Probably the Graham.
The Graham tragedy in 1885.
Yeah.
Now, and I am less familiar with these. Just getting something that I was certainly a takeaway for me. We all understand that human nature is what it is,
right?
And bad things have always happened. But there is I think a sort of psychological push to say that things are getting worse.
Yeah.
Things are worse than they've ever been. Crime is at an all-time high. The people of the past were gentle, kind, generous souls who never did anything really bad. And, just this short list of murders from the 1880s, 1890s
right.
says, yeah, people really haven't changed.
No.
And I think in many cases, we're actually, certainly here in the U.S., I think we're oftentimes much safer. Than we were, and safer from crime, more specifically, in addition to being safer from accidents and disease and those sort of things.
I think that's very fair to say.
So life is actually better. You didn't know that, did you? For many of us. Not everybody. No. I'm still up for grabs. Who knows?
We're wondering here.
Everyone's wondering. Channeling my inner Deadpool. I'm just having these moments. No lie.
Can't take you out in public anymore.
We really can't. We really can't.
Okay. The Graham case actually was in Greene County, around the Springfield area.
Yes.
And basically, it involved Emma Malloy. She had a farm, and she had an adopted daughter.
And she was an evangelist and a temperance speaker.
Yes. And then here comes along George Graham, and he's an ex-con. But he took up preaching in prison.
Yes. And
somehow enamored Emma. And they became engaged to be married. And then...
So Emma, what I'm really picking up from this is that Emma saw herself as sort of a guiding light, and also a woman of second chances, giving everyone around her a second chance.
I think so, because she had an adopted daughter and a foster daughter, giving him a second chance that he'd redeemed himself, etc. And he redeemed himself by announcing that he was going to marry her adopted daughter Cora, and so this turns into Emma ends up killing him, and there's a lynching involved. I forget who got lynched. I apologize. So then it turns into a big murder trial.
And what was the point, the causation point? Why did she kill him?
Because he was going to marry her daughter instead
of her. Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could hurt.
Yeah. So she wasn't so temperate over that.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. The Knoxville Girl.
Oh yes.
That one really jumped out to me. Late 1890s, I believe.
Let's see.
Knoxville Girl, early 1890s, 1892. In the Elk River, we're talking kind of south of you. And a situation in which a girl is beaten to death and or strangled by her boyfriend. And then her body is winds up in Elk River.
Yes.
And then found. And presumably the boyfriend was already on a train out of town, and doesn't say, but
yeah, that's the gist, and it was actually turned into a murder ballad.
Yes.
And the Knoxville Girl, and the song itself was an English song that they used as the basis of it, but yeah, this would have been southeast of Joplin. And then of course there's the Frankie Baker story, Johnny and Frankie, which is sort of the archetypical he done a wrong story, which has been retold a number of times. It started out east, but the version that is sung in the songs and the play and the movie is based on an actual case in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area.
Yes, murder case.
Murder case, yeah. Basically, Frankie catches Johnny with another girl. He swears that he has been faithful. She doesn't believe him, kills him, and then finds out that he was telling the truth.
And part of the story also includes him essentially being the pimp.
Yes.
And she's the prostitute.
Yes.
Along with that. I did think it was interesting, of course, sort of the era of Tin Pan Alley, which wasn't in St. Louis, but that era of everybody's looking for the next great song.
Yeah.
The recollection is that someone in St. Louis had penned and published this song by the end of the day.
Yeah.
After the news comes out of this murder.
Yeah. And the song was famous, and it's also the basis of one of the murals by Thomas Hart Benton that's in the state capitol, which
some folks had issue with.
Yes, some people were not happy for that to be in the capitol.
And in that, of course, murder ballads, perfect for Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Murder ballads, a huge part of the substrate of early settlement America, and a substrate of English folk songs.
Yes.
That Banks of the Ohio certainly come to mind. And, the situation of the girl who goes for a walk along the banks of the Ohio or other places with her lover and then is surprised when he stabs her to death.
Yes, knocks her over the head with a rock or something.
Yeah. It's not funny.
Yeah.
It's tragic.
It is. And it usually does have that theme of he does it because he thinks that she has not been true to him, and then as she dies, he realizes he's made a mistake.
Yes, and so it functions as a cautionary tale. But a lot of this just really speaks to the fact, to me anyway, as we are concluding our discussion, that the problems, the issues that are innate to humanity haven't changed.
No.
And the fortunate side is the fact that we are still shocked. We can still be shocked by them. And I think part of the shock value or the shock factor is that they are, well, it still happens. Horrible things still happen. Per capita, they tend to happen less. Yes.
Despite the nightly news.
Yes. And to me, that's very gratifying. Probably our nicest thing that we can share on Valentine's week of 2022. Horrible things happen less. That's the headline.
Such a hopeless romantic.
I really am. I'll make my own line of cards. I think it also is fair to say that the Rowan moon was last night, and I think we're still feeling the effects of the winter lunar cycle.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, I am anyway. Oh, do we have anything else?
I think that pretty well winds it up.
Okay, all right. Set your calendars for clocks. Set your clocks for March 12th.
Yes.
We will be at the Coleman Theater with a great group of folks.
Yes, we will. It's going to be a lot of fun. Go on the page, you can find the event. You can go to the link and order tickets.
Mm-hmm.
An all-day event that it's worth just seeing the Coleman.
It is a beautiful, beautiful location. Great interaction, lots of fun. We share stories back and forth from audience to stage and
Yes.
from stage to audience. It's a wonderful time.
Yes, it's not just talking heads, and it's a group effort, and then you get to tour the Coleman, and it's haunted.
And it is haunted. Yeah, that's very exciting. Looking forward to it. Also, check out Dark Ozarks merchandise on Amazon.
Yes.
I'll ask Darren to place a link below.
Sounds good.
All right.
And we will see you next week.
Absolutely. We thank you all. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Josh.
And happy Valentine's week.